to the Audible Live. Welcome. It's week 8, and we've got kind of an old school matchup in that these teams, I think, like to put their physical stamp on the game. Baltimore at Tampa Bay. And again, in a season that is keeping us guessing after running the ball 44 times and throwing the ball 16 times last week. The Ravens come out, I think, in the first 18 plays, threw the ball 15 times. It hasn't been working. The running game hasn't been working. Not much has been working. Lamar Jackson for the last month or so looking very mortal in terms of fantasy. He hasn't even been an advantage in fantasy, and he's not an advantage on the field. And I'm not exactly sure how to diagnose this, except maybe on a short week, it's an angry Tampa Bay team that got humiliated against Carolina. And what you're seeing on the Tampa side is a little more success throwing from Tom Brady, Leonard Fournette finishing the 1 touchdown drive, but still the Tampa does not look like a top half of the league offense. Baltimore doesn't look like a top half of the league offense tonight. Didn't really quite last week. The Gus Edwards coming out party last week, barely running at all and not doing very much. So it's almost Halloween. And Dia de los Muertos and all these wonderful things here as we get to the fall festivals, Matt. And in your always appointment reading top 10, you took on the hard-hitting question. It's great. Is Tom Brady, is it witchcraft? Of course, it's not witchcraft, but it leads us into the question of what's going on with Tom Brady. And really, we can branch this out to an Aaron Rodgers question, too, because I almost thought of doing an article this week, Matt, that is something like, what are the biggest questions, going into basically the halfway point of the season? What are the biggest questions? What are things that are still unresolved? And I think one of the biggest ones is these Tampa Bay and Green Bay offenses that we thought were going to be at the very least, slightly above average, right? Any offense that is led by Tom Brady, led by a future Hall of Fame quarterback who isn't on that last tour that we like to forget, that last team they were with for 1 year that we just forget. So at least as good as like Minnesota Brett Favre, right?
Yeah.
It's not happening. And so many values in these offenses that we saw hinging on the guys like A.J. Dillon, right? That we thought these are going to be at least reasonably good environments for fantasy production. So let's start with Tampa Bay. It's not witchcraft. What has it been, and can it get better?
Yeah, and I will say this, though, as you were talking about witchcraft and all this, your familiar was walking behind you.
Of course.
So it was just like on brand. It was perfect on cue there for you, Wizard. But I will say that with Tom Brady, let's understand that I think a lot of people who are saying, well, quarterback play is bad as a result, and that's really why points are down and why rushing is up and expected points for the passing game is down. I think that's a simplistic answer and maybe a little bit more witchcrafty, magical thinking than what's really going on. And it's understandable because we're taught to follow the quarterback and the ball, and we've been trained to do that since like probably about the 1960s when they started doing broadcast film and focusing on quarterback as CEO and all these things. So when you look at Tom Brady, let's understand some things. Yes, he's dealing with maybe 2 to 3% less pressure this year than he was last year. But the source of the pressure is up the middle, which is it has the highest amount of gravity and impact on his game. Like he told Tristan Wirfs, if you're going to do anything, do not get beat quickly and get beat inside quickly. If you can avoid those two things, I can function. If you can't, I'm done. So those are some of the things. That's one factor that's happening. The second factor that's happening is that these defenses are designed, they contained Patrick Mahomes and they're killing everybody else other than Josh Allen for the most effect. I mean, if you look at this, so the point scoring are down because when you have too high and everyone in the league has been brought up in the high school and college level to basically throw the ball downfield and to attack defenses vertically and aggressively. And because they can spread them out and they get all this, single coverage, man-to-man, one high safety looks, or cover 3 at worst that converts to man, they win on that. Now this cover 2, it's like they put a governor on the things that they like to do the most and think they're supposed to do the best, which is air it out. And these young guys think, well, I can do that. I mean, come on now. They have faith in themselves and they're running up against the wall a few times. This is the season of, you hitting your head up against the wall a few times until you figure out maybe you need to stop because you're getting a headache. And I think that's part of it too, is that it's putting a little bit more on underneath passing. And part of underneath passing isn't just whether Tom Brady's good at reading defenses, because of course he is, that's his strength, but does he have the receivers and the rapport with them to do it? Julio Jones has played all of 1.5, 2 games thus far this year. So how much rapport do they really get? How much rapport does he have with Russell Gage, who last week couldn't even finish a route right because he didn't read the defense correctly, and that cost them either a green zone possession or a touchdown. And his receivers have been in and out of the lineup, and 2 of them are at least new. And then you lose your tight end on top of that, and he's a rookie and he's playing pretty well. But all of that you can explain and say points are down, and Tom Brady still was 13th heading into this week. So yes, I think there's hope for Tom Brady as long as his receivers can stay healthy. Is it he's going to return to the expectation people had? People didn't expect it last year, or at least most people didn't. And then this year they were expecting it, but the league got clamped down with the too high looks. I think he'll probably wind up closer to the top 5 than to the bottom half of the top 10, as long as Julio either can stay healthy, or Russell Gage or Cade Otton really acclimate. If one of those 2 things happen, I think you're going to see a reasonable rebound with him, that he's at least a startable quarterback for you.
Yeah, you would think this. And the funny thing is, they're still basically the favorite to win the division with everything that has gone wrong. So it can get better. But you're right. I think you make some key points that are good things to generalize. The source of pressure, and it can change for different quarterbacks. Because you talked about with Kenny Pickett, it's not so much pressure; it's pressure when he doesn't know where it's coming from. He can handle it really well if he diagnoses correctly where it's coming from. And with Tom Brady, I think because of limited mobility, because of how he works in the middle of the field and things, and he doesn't have. I know he's the GOAT, but he's not the GOAT in terms of arm strength and arm talent. Okay, and those are things. It's just like Peyton Manning. I remember sometimes football can be so simple, Matt. With Peyton Manning. And this is even simpler. It was move him off his spot. Just make him move his feet. Yeah. Just make him move his feet, and all of a sudden his chances of success go way down. The Steelers are so good at that.
Or make him be impatient because he wanted to attack you downfield.
Right.
And if you made him take the underneath stuff, his aggressive tendencies will get the worst of him on occasion. That's how Seattle killed them in the Super Bowl, because they kept saying, keep taking Julius Thomas, and we're going to keep hitting Julius Thomas because we know he can't catch the ball against contact. And eventually you're just going to say, forget it. I'm going over the top. And even MVP level Peyton Manning was getting baited into that kind of stuff in big games.
Yeah. It's psychology, right? I mean, in some ways it's like psychological kung fu. It's not even so much down to tendencies and personnel sets and play calls and things like that. It's just understanding what makes a quarterback tick, and how to thwart that and use his tendencies against him, or use his desires. Really reading more Buddhist here. Use his desires against him. Real quick on Baltimore, Greg Roman. I thought he would have been fired years ago. Really. I mean, in some ways, I think why we see the Lamar Jackson Ravens get so summarily dismissed out of the playoffs is because we see every year when you go to the postseason, the screws get tighter, and you can't just do the same things, right? Remember the first year with Lamar Jackson, they actually make the playoffs and they just get embarrassed, I think, by the Chargers. And we've just seen them underperform. And otherwise, we just see defenses aren't afraid of Lamar Jackson. And for the first few games this year, defenses weren't just afraid of Lamar Jackson. They were in awe of him, basically. We were all in awe of him. Remember, pay this man, and how many more million is he making every game? For the last 4 or 5 games, now they haven't had a healthy Rashad Bateman, but it really can't just be that, right? It really can't just be Rashad Bateman. Maybe it's just that the offensive line still hasn't gotten back to the levels it was. I'm not sure, but you can see that defenses aren't afraid of him, and the Steelers, even during down years, could frustrate Lamar Jackson because getting into this mental aspects of the game. I think with Lamar Jackson, what you want to do is make him make a decision early in the play, make him make a decision right away. And if you can make him do that, and you're not getting to the extended plays where he can run, where someone can break free, where he really demoralizes your defense, blitzing him and otherwise forcing the issue and making him think very quickly and decide very quickly. And to me, that again comes back to not being afraid. Not being afraid. Defenses aren't afraid of him at all. How much of that is Greg Roman not setting Lamar Jackson up for success? And how much of that is just that there has to be more counter punches? There has to be more combinations for this to actually work.
Well, I love that you first talked about the pressure, because they are definitely sending blitz packages to disrupt Jackson. And it's not that Jackson isn't fantastic in the pocket in terms of hanging in there. The problem is like you said, it's about the type of pressure that he has difficulty with, because every quarterback has difficulty with a type of pressure. His type is, he's great if you give him 2.5 seconds or more. If you give him more, if you give him that, he'll hang in the pocket all day, or he'll run around like Kyler Murray, or he'll just simply gain chunk yardage and not get touched. And that's very dangerous. But the problem is that this offensive line is not that good. I mean, you can even see on their running plays with their gap plays, they've got Powers, that kid Powers. I mean, I feel like I could look at a sand dial for him to get around the edge. I mean, if he hits you, it's a big deal. But it's like watching those old 1950s movies of like The Blob, and it's like slowly overtaking the city, you know, and you're like, well, how do you not get away from that? You know, I mean, so, but that's kind of how I feel when I'm watching that. Maybe it's like a John Waters movie, you know, making fun of these war movies, but Baltimore native himself. But the thing about this is that it has to be partially due to scheme too, because you see glimpses of them getting imaginative, like we talked about a couple weeks ago with Devin Duvernay, and then they just went away from it. You know, they just totally went away from it. They have the tools to become more imaginative and create more binds, but they seem complacent about using it. And there's two ends of the spectrum with offensive football, and that people criticize. They're either not predictable enough. They're too predictable, and people are like, oh, we know what's coming, and we need to be more strategic, and we need to trick people and do these things. And then on the other end of the spectrum is that teams that do that, they go, well, they don't have any plays that actually seem to work. And there's a point where you just want to play football, where you got to dominate your opponent. And you've got to find that happy medium between the two. And the Ravens and the Steelers are more on the side of like, we're going to kick your, basically type of thing.
You know what's coming, doesn't matter. But the thing is, that's backwards looking football.
It's not backwards if it's balanced.
Well, let me give you an example. Okay. Let me give you an example. Let's be honest. I don't want to derail you, but you know, a good example of being old school but still with a new school wrinkle, or just understanding the psychological kung fu, was and Dan Orlovsky highlighted this. I talked about this earlier this week on one of our shows. The way at the end of the game against the Jags, the Giants are going power right, power left, and then fake to power right, and it's a naked bootleg, and Daniel Jones gets like 20 yards. So it's still understanding it's the chess game, the mental chess game of, well, this is what you're anticipating. And I don't think in the Steelers, and I'm glad you lumped the Steelers in with the Ravens, because the Steelers are another offense that just looks so predictable and so finite. And then that in turn creates a snowball effect where the defense gets confident and the defense plays on their toes instead of their heels. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The best team that does it are the 49ers, actually. I would even argue that the Shanahan tree has always been very good at saying, oh, if we're going to keep doing it until you stop us. But that doesn't mean stop us for 5 or 6 plays in a row. It means I'm going to do this 3 or 4 times in a row until you show that you can stop it. And then I'm going to do it one more time to make you think that I'm being stubborn,
right?
And then pull the constraint play. And that's what you look at when you see a guy like Duvernay, and you see some of the options that they had that they could do more with. But instead, they're more like, oh, well, that was a fluke. I'm going to overpower you again. They're like, the NFC North is like a bunch of Goliaths who like work in like basically work in a mill, and they have that thinking of like, I'm just going to out tough you. And that's kind of the downfall about it, is that you got to have a mix of the brains into that in terms of being strategic. So, on the other hand, you could look at Sean McVay and you could say that while his offenses are simpler in terms of what he does, he has a limited amount of things. Sometimes he's just consistently trying to out finesse you to the point it's like, look at my big brain, look what I'm able to do. And then someone comes along and goes, whatever, we're just going to overpower you because you're afraid to actually step up and hit somebody in the mouth.
Right.
And so it can be, for writers, it's easier for us to identify where they're just too predictable. And we tend to self-select towards that. But yeah, I mean, I agree. The Ravens right now, that until they can become, it's almost like they're trying to enable the very stereotype of Lamar Jackson that the Ravens actually fought against by selecting him. It was almost like they're acting like they're the saviors to his quarterbacking. And see, we're gonna take this kid and who has no business being a quarterback, and we're gonna show you that we can make him a quarterback, as opposed to actually going, he's a really good quarterback if you let him be a really good quarterback. And I think that's part of the problem here, is that you have one side that said he's a wide receiver, and people are like, oh, that's ignorant and that's racist and that's all these things. And then you have the other side that might be screaming that, but then going, well, see, you have to do these special things with them to an extent. If you don't, then maybe he's not a good quarterback. And I think that's the opposite end of the spectrum that can be equally as bad. Let the dude play and create an offense for him that works in the same way that you might create one for, Jalen Hurts and he can play, or you created one or you put Steve Young in, or you put, Josh Allen. Josh Allen had specific things that you had to do with him to really make it work well before he grew into what he did. So it's a fascinating question for sure with all that.
Well, you almost want to reboot, right? That's why you fire Greg Roman, is you want to reboot and start from and look at what you have. Look what you have. Limitations. Ronnie Stanley's not the same. The offensive line just isn't the same. They did get Tyler Linderbaum maybe this year. Give it time. That's a great pick, and that's a great place to start if you're going to rebuild an offensive line. They've also had some injury. I think Patrick McCarry has played like every position on the offensive line in the last couple of years. So they've had some problems with offensive line, but I also think that you can see that they're just not evolving. And you talk about the physical edge. I think that's another reason where it falls short in the postseason, because every team in the postseason, with a few exceptions, can usually handle a physical game. You aren't getting to the postseason if you can't. Now, in the regular season, you're going to run into teams that can't handle that, are going to shy away, or maybe just aren't mentally up for it. Go ahead.
The problem with the Ravens is that when you face them, you're going to get into a physical war, just like the Steelers.
Yeah.
So after you face them, you might be too damaged to actually continue on, and you limp forward. So you hate playing them because they are like, what the outcome should be, and you should win, but you're like, it's like your kid brother. If your kid brother's like a complete pain, and you're when you were growing up and you're like, he's gonna, I'm gonna have to beat him down, not in a real abusive way, but I'm gonna beat him down, but he's probably gonna do something to me that's gonna be painful. He's gonna sneak something in that I'm not gonna leave this unscathed either.
Oh, yeah. As a little brother, you had a prerogative that you really could get the foreign object out of the trunks. And not that you wouldn't get in trouble, but it was just understood the little brother has those tactics at their disposal.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting news today in the trade front. I think we're going to see some trade movement. I say tomorrow, in NFL terms, next week, before the Tuesday deadline. But we saw a trade today, and I'll just give my brief thoughts before I hand it off to you, Matt. But Kadarius Toney goes to the Chiefs for a late third, like a compensatory third, and a sixth, which actually surprised me. I didn't think they were going to get a second-day pick. It's barely a second-day pick, but it's still a second-day pick. And the Giants eat the $7.3 million first-round signing bonus. And it's a very Andy Reid. It's one of those things, sometimes, Matt, in hindsight, who would trade for Kadarius? Of course, Andy Reid. If it's not Pete Carroll, it's Andy Reid, right? I mean, those are your second chance tour kind of guys. Sometimes it's Bill Belichick, but we'll see where Belichick is on this stuff. It makes sense.
Might be the third trip.
Right. Exactly. Well, and it's funny because one of the names that comes up is Josh Gordon, right? And where's Josh Gordon been? Like, look at some of the places. I think he's been with all three of those teams, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. It's good. It's optimists, right? It's this idea of, hey, we know you have something to contribute. We understand that you may have had problems, personal problems with previous teams, but we're giving you a clean slate. It's called the clean slate, big tent kind of approach. So that all made sense. A lot of people's initial analysis, and this may be the good analysis, is this isn't about 2022. This is about 2023 and beyond. And I see you nodding along, so I knew you'll be able to expound on that. But for folks that are looking more short term, let's start with short term. Is there anything there? Should people go running out to pick him up or trade for him on the cheap in a redraft league thinking, ooh, explosives with Toney and Patrick Mahomes? As Toney says, I'm healthy, even though the Giants said, no, you're not.
If you have 25 roster spots or more, absolutely. If you play in a league that most people play in, which is like 20 or less, then probably not. You're going to want to monitor what's going on with him, but it's probably going to take a couple weeks for him to get up to speed just with the scheme. On top of that, it depends on where he's actually going to go. I did a podcast on this today within Ott's focus solely on this trade about why they made the trade, what they have to offer with Toney. But, for me this year, I think if anything, he could provide depth for you, but they're going to have to tell him what to do on the field when they're on the field, just like they did with McCaffrey in week 1 in San Francisco. And it might take a little bit more for him to get up to speed. They could probably also use him right away as a punt returner if he's healthy enough. But the thing that I'll say about it all comes down to health. And you're going to hear people talk about maybe he's not tough enough, the maturity questions, all those things. But when I studied Toney at Florida, one, he is a Stephon Diggs level prospect in terms of upside, what his ceiling could be. He's a terrific route runner. He has great release skills. He tracks the ball unbelievably well, and he's great after the catch. The difference between he and Stephon Diggs, one of the biggest difference in terms of on tape, is that Kadarius Toney has always made these wide radius movements where like his cuts and his plants are far ahead of his body in certain instances that cause him to make awkward looking cuts or awkward things that where he's either not balanced or he's putting a lot of stress on his body. And that can lead to either soft tissue injuries or if, hopefully not, he gets hit while doing that, that could lead to some ligament issues or some tears in his frame. And I think that what you see on a minor level with that is you heard early in camp as a rookie, he slipped and fell on a lot of routes on a number, and you would see that at Florida. But when he lands those types of movements, you watch what he did against the Cowboys as an outside receiver, and he destroyed them. And the problem is that, Russ Landy brought this up on my Scout Talk podcast a few weeks ago. Coaches value reliability over high upside talent. If they have to choose one or the other, right, the guy needs to be available.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that he's soft. It means that if your movement depends on you to be successful, it depends on you having this unusual type of movement. And in order for you to have that unusual type of movement, you have to be 100% healthy, because if you try to do it at the NFL level of healthy, which is somewhere between 70 and 85%, and you can't do that, and you can't be effective doing that, then you can't play. So it's not that he's not tough enough. It's that his style of movement, it prohibits him from being able to play unless he's 100%. And if coaches see that, they're like, you got to fix this, or how are we going to count on you? And they may not even be analyzing it to that degree. They're just looking at it and saying he's not available and he can't play. And they may assign that he's not tough enough. I don't think it's about toughness. If you watch him run between the tackles, that dude's plenty tough, and he's great at that. The issue is that what I don't think people are looking at is it's that uncontrolled, less efficient movement. And so he's a real boom bust guy that way. And I think if the Chiefs scouted him well and looked at that, when he gets in the door, they should be able to say, look, man, we want you to be great. We think you could be an upgrade to Mecole Hardman. Not forget Sky Moore. I'm hearing people saying Sky Moore is the better player. Sure, that's great. You can put Toney outside or inside just like Moore, but you can use him more in lines with Mecole Hardman and get more out of him in theory. if he can stay healthy. But they got to say, look, man, you got to be willing to work. You got to work on your craft in these aspects so that you can be available. Like Sammy Watkins, he had that issue. And we thought we got some good stuff out of him, but not enough. And that's why he's gone. You can either be, you've got to fix this the way Sammy did. And we've got people who do work on the body, body control movement aspect and getting your body right to play so that you don't incur injury. That was something that Watkins said about the Chiefs that he really appreciated about them, is that while it hasn't worked out for him completely, it's still, there were moments where he did give them credit and he felt better than he had. So Bloom, I mean, long term, I want to know what you think about this, but I think that, from the Giants side, this part of this was, to me, was that Brian Daboll looked at this, and I want to see if you think this makes sense to you. But Brian Daboll came into this and said, listen, Dave Gettleman paid alpha primary receiver money to a secondary receiver in Kenny Golladay, who basically earned his money off of the backs of Golden Tate and Marvin Jones, who drew all the main coverage, and he drew linebackers and safeties and got number one production out of it, but not with the process that you would expect. So Galladay's been enabled, he's probably been enabled to think, I got this big money. I deserve to be on the field. They paid me to be the guy. I've done the production. Why not? Even though the year he came to the Giants, he didn't look anything like a number one receiver. On top of that, you could point the finger at Daniel Jones, but Daboll's smart enough to know that I can't do that, or else the whole team will give up on me. So what do? Let me focus on these receivers. I got Kadarius Toney's a little immature. I got Golladay, who's probably been enabled to think he's great, and he's not. And so let me tell them it's an open competition. If they don't do it, if they don't perform and work on the things they need to and aren't available at the craft that they should be, then I can make an example out of them, and they'll either turn it around, or I can get rid of them because I'm not attached to either one of them. This is the previous regime's mistake.
Exactly.
And then my team buys into me. The media is focused on them and not Daniel Jones and what the ups and downs of his career. And now we can talk about, well, Daniel Jones doesn't have receivers, and I'm trying my best to fashion receivers for him. And when Jones makes mistakes, I rip into him, but I'm still pointing the finger at the receivers. And Toney was the one that was more salvageable because he's younger. And I think that at this stage, they just decided it's not worth it with either of these guys.
Right.
And let's move on and get our picks and go forward.
Yeah, and Cecil brought up, hey, Kenny Galladay for Jerry Jeudy, who says no. I mean, you're talking about players that are just in need of a fresh start. And as far as what Daboll's doing, and look, there's stuff we're peeking through keyholes. We're taking things, and Russ Landy's a perfect name to bring up when we reveal, hey, we're taking things on faith or just on reports that aren't true. Things get distorted with Toney, but that he and Daboll didn't start off on the right foot. And whatever's going on now, like you said, it's kind of a get out of jail free card where it's like you can trade him. He belongs to the previous regime, and they're having success, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, everything you described makes a lot of sense. And Toney's talent is undeniable, but you're right that you have to be available to the team. And what do they say? Can't make the club in the tub. Yeah. So that's it.
I mean, that's that thing. It's like the whole, if we're going to use a Cecil Lammey, we miss Cecil, and say if we're going to use the Cecil Lammey type of story, it would be, listen, you ask this girl out on a date, you think she likes you. Her friends tell you she likes you. She's told you she likes you. And every time you call her up to do something, she always has to bail out and has something else to do. After 5 or 6 times, if she's not available for you to go out, you're gonna think that's that's what's happening. You got to take it at face value.
Yeah, that's what's gonna happen the next time too. Okay, big seismic fantasy football news today in Cincinnati with Jamar Chase. And first thing I'll unpack here is you always gotta watch when a player. Well, first of all, anytime we should catalog when players come into the game on the injury report. Number one, and Chase was coming into the game with a hip on the injury report. Number two, when a player leaves the game or even limps off and they favor that part of their body that they were on the injury report for, that could be a re-injury or aggravation. And as Dr. Gene has taught us, talking about him in the chat room right now, that is often a worse injury than the first injury. So even though he didn't, I don't believe he missed the rest of the game. I think he returned after a few snaps. Didn't practice today, and now they're saying 4 to 6 weeks, but it's a very vague 4 to 6 weeks. It's like depending, it's 4 to 6 weeks because we think Jamar Chase can heal faster than a typical person. You know, you read between the lines. It's rest to heal something, and they hope that that'll work. And it might, but this isn't the same as, he went to have a procedure. It takes this long before he's cleared to play after the procedure. That's not, I think it's a hip flexor issue. And so I think that 4 to 6 weeks is hopeful, but it's not a hard timeline to return. So I'll give my fantasy prescription, speaking to the doctor, and then I'll ask you, what do you think the shark move is here? Because to me, I think this is an offense that's shown that it's a good offense. It's an offense that can evolve. It's an offense that can evolve to changing circumstances, whether it be defenses, whether it be just their approach. And I think that you're going to see not as pass happy an offense, but I would say that T. Higgins' value is roughly what Jamar Chase's value was. Tyler Boyd's value is roughly what Keenan Allen's value was going into the season, like a third-round pick. He's going to hoover up 6 or 7 catches a game, at least every game, 60, 70, 80 yards. And you saw last week give you, now that's with Chase out there. But I don't think this is one of those cases where Chase is a keystone and you take him out, and now all of a sudden nothing is working in the offense. I think this offense will be okay. So I think you buy Boyd. I think Hayden Hurst, obviously, a tight end, just another couple of targets a week can make all the difference and he's been decent. I think you've seen demonstrated in year one, there's some chemistry between he and Burrow, and he can help shoulder some of the load. When you look at the amount of targets vacated, it's like double-digit targets vacated. Now, some of those are going to turn into carries. Some of it's going to be a more balanced offense. But I think overall, it's going to be okay. Now, on the Chase front, I think it just depends on your record. I think if you're in how good your team is. If you're a strong team at 6-1, 5-2, and you can ride it out. Let's see what happens. Unless you really feel like there's too much equivocation in his return to play timeline, and you'd rather cash him in right now. Somebody told me on the other hand, someone say that's 4-3, 3-4, saying, I can't wait this out. I need to turn him into something I can use now. Someone in my timeline told me they got Devontae Smith for him. That's a really good, right?
That's fantastic.
Now, and I think Devontae Smith might make it easier, but these are the kinds of moves you'd explore, and you hit up the 6-1 or 7-0 team in your league. That's who's going to be interested in Jamar Chase right now. So there's moves to be made, is what I'm saying, Matt Waldman. What moves would you be making?
I think Jamar, if I needed a running back, Jamar Chase, maybe I can get Raheem Mostert and another player on top
Raheem
of that.
Mostert's in my buy low column this week, or actually buy high because he's playing well.
That's right. And you and I are on the same page. I had him last week as the guy ready for liftoff this week, as as the guy. And I would say if Zeke is okay, and I saw the hit that was on his knee, he was very lucky that his foot scraped the ground, and then he only has a minor MCL issue. If he can heal within a week and be okay, maybe you would take, if you take the chance on him, you better take the chance on him and see if you can get him in a real buy low opportunity where the other guy is a massive pot sweetener, and Elliott's more the add-on that you hope that you can lean on as an RB2. As a weak RB2, and you have a strong team elsewhere. But I mean, those are some considerations there. Obviously, like you talked about with the different receivers that you could consider in this. I mean, anybody that I think is a solid wide receiver 2, but isn't likely to ever be a wide receiver 1 in terms of this year, because he's not the primary guy like a Devonta Smith, I think is a perfect way to trade and maybe get a little change out of the deal too. And if you don't, it's okay, because if you're 4-3, again, you're trying to win now. And I do think, I mean, I agree with everything you said about what the Bengals are going to be, other than that the only thing I would probably debate a little bit is that Chase's explosiveness after the catch and up the sideline is just good enough that it's it's a little better than what T. Higgins is going to offer. Whereas like T. Higgins is to me is more Mike Williams with a little better route comparison. Whereas, you know, you look at Chase and he's not as versatile as Justin Jefferson, but he's more Justin Jefferson than T. Higgins is Justin Jefferson. And as a result of that, defenses may be able to defend and a little bit Higgins a little bit better in that respect. But I don't think it's going to crater the Bengals by any stretch of the imagination. So I think you've got that set up well.
Yeah, and I think Boyd's the buy just because he was a 10th round pick, and I think it's gonna take a little bit for us to catch up. I think I'd like to put Keenan Allen out there because he was a 3rd round pick going in, and maybe he shouldn't have been a 3rd round pick because he's 30 and we shouldn't be taking guys on the back 9 of their career. But my point is, and Boyd's 27, it's gonna turn 28 this next month. My point is only that he's going to play a similar role, similar quality quarterback, and so on. Yeah. And I think you could probably get him for less than 3rd round value right now.
I agree.
I mean, I even think it's not totally outlandish if the best you could do with Chase and you feel like you need to turn him into somebody, Boyd, turn him into Boyd. I mean, that's reasonable to at least keep your team afloat. I want to just mention Breece Hall, and it's just sad. Although I gave Scott Barrett, I cheered him up when he was saying it's depressing. You know, it's like we all have to be like the Jets. We all have to trooper on. But how bad is it going to be, Matt? Now, this is the keystone because it's going to expose Zach Wilson. I mean, we're going to see Joe Flacco. How bad is it going to be for the Jets against New England this weekend?
Well, if you listen to Jets fans on Twitter, when I said that Joe Flacco if the Jets can somehow manage 7 wins by Thanksgiving, that Joe Flacco will be back, they all basically were like doing
the Bronx cheer.
They were giving me the Bronx cheer really hard, and I don't pay attention because I'm used to those guys doing that. Then that's okay, but it makes me laugh because it's like they're like, well, he's just as bad, just in a different way. I'm like, yeah, but at least he gave you offense. Yeah. He like distributed his receivers. He didn't have. You know, he didn't have Elijah Moore doing his Odell Beckham impression to Zach Wilson's Baker Mayfield, and I feel like, you know, it's beginning to smell a little bit like Baker in New York right
something's
now.
Burning.
Yeah, something's burning.
The smoke alarm's gonna go off.
Exactly, and it doesn't even have a tasty initial smell or after smell with it. You know? It's like a couch cushion.
What is that? Something rotting? Something cooking? I don't know.
Yeah, is that something out of the East River that they can set on fire? I don't know.
Did something die?
You don't swim in the East River, so
right.
Or if you do, you probably already have scales. But but that's the thing is that with this offense, I mean, Zach Wilson he looks like the player he was at BYU, if you ask me, which is overconfident in certain areas of where he shouldn't throw the ball. His footwork does not support pinpoint accuracy in 2 ranges of the field, in terms of the intermediate range and the short area of the field. He makes crazy decisions when things don't go well. He tries to be the hero, and you just don't know what you're going to get from one play to the next with him because things aren't consistent yet with his game. So I think that he's going to be exposed, and I think that Flacco, at least, you got to protect him, and if you don't protect him, you're lost. But you know that he's not going to screw up the game with an erratic decision. He's going to screw up the game because of his limitations that can be exploited based on the lack of support that can't do enough to protect him. He's not going to extend. So maybe Zach Wilson's sexier, but, sometimes sexier can get you in a whole lot of trouble. So,
talking about New York City, right? Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see. And I want the fun New York, New Jersey stories. They play New Jersey. I want those fun stories to keep going. I'm really looking forward to the Giants Seattle game. And for all the stories of scoring is down and defense and fantasy points are down. And look, there's enough metrics out there that show that scoring is down in a significant way. And I don't think
2011.
Right. and it could be there's not any one explanation, right? I mean, the thing is, I was speculating, Matt, that just the underachieving Tampa and Green Bay offenses might be responsible for like 1/3 of the way that the league is underachieved. But when you think about it for fantasy, right? If you had some sort of cumulative fantasy points expected based on ADP values, and these offenses underperforming, I think there's a lot of under expectation production.
Listen, you're wearing the Wizards hat.
Yeah.
And we were talking about witchcraft earlier. I've got one for you.
Yeah.
And it fits with my desire that I like demon TikTok as opposed to witch TikTok. Yeah. There's a guy called Infernum Asylum who dresses up like a demon, and he's hilarious. Yeah. He actually sounds like an old Yenta grandfather more than anything, where he entered, and it's all tongue in cheek.
He's going to make a golem.
Yeah. But to me, if we're going to go there, I have the tie to demons because it's all tied back to Art Modell. And I'm going to tell you why. Put some tinfoil around that tall hat and listen to me and cock it at about 45 degrees, and you might get the reception there. There we go. Is that Baker Mayfield is responsible for, how horrid the Panthers are, and that must be at least 35% of the issues right there, right?
Right.
And if Baker Mayfield would not have existed if the zombie Browns didn't exist and they were still in Baltimore. And then as a result of that, we wouldn't have had that problem if Art Modell hadn't taken the Baltimore Ravens and put them in Baltimore. But then again, we could circle back and blame it all on Jim Irsay or Robert Irsay. Yeah. Because if he hadn't taken them out, then none of this would have happened. I say give the Ravens back to them, give the Ravens back to the Browns. We can give the Colts back to the Ravens, and then to Baltimore, and then the Colts can get the Browns, but they have to pay a penalty, and they can't take Myles Garrett or Nick Chubb with them, and I'll call it fair. That's okay. That would balance the chips.
This is kind of like time machine stuff. Like if you had a time machine, what would
hot tub time? If we did hot tub time machine, this would be the thing. And I would be stuck with you and Cecil as two Steeler fans trying to muck up the works, and I'm trying to go off to do this, and you guys won't let me.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Yeah. Lots of black man. And I even remember, I'll sign off with this one too. I remember there was a streak in the 80s, Matt. You probably remember this. Yeah. I mean, was there a streak where the Browns didn't win Three River Stadium for like 15 or 20 years? Yeah. It was long time. And I remember, I don't think it worked, but they had like a witch from Cleveland come up and bring some of the dirt from Cleveland and like sprinkle it on the field and like perform something. Witchcraft can belong in football. We make it all belong in football here.
And Gene we'd all be freaked out coming out of the time machine, and Gene would be going, it's only weird if you make it weird,
Yeah. So it is. It'd be great. I would have been able to ask Gene a question like a witchcraft question just to see his reaction. But Brian Sumner was in the chat room. He's putting together some great images for us, so we still keep Dr. Gene close to our hearts. And of course, Footballguys subscription. You're going to get all the injury notes, including on Sunday mornings, Mondays, summing up everything happened the day before. Folks, we love you. We love getting to take this journey with you every year. Chat room, you are fantastic. Thanks for encouraging us. Thanks for rolling with us. We like to have fun. We also are serious about our football analysis, and really just that you trust us and you give us your time and attention. It's a privilege to serve. Always, y'all are the best because you're so classy.